We were told that Orthodoxy has one cross, one tradition, and the Romanovs only restored order after the time of troubles. But on the towers of the Kremlin, there are three different types of crosses, like three incompatible systems. Why are the gravestones of the Rurikids and Godunovs turned into steps and curbs? Why does this stone pattern stretch across the old cities but disappear where Imperial Petersburg begins? And if all this stone is a trace of erased power, whose history has been rewritten for us under the guise of a single Orthodox heritage, look at the crosses of the Moscow Kremlin, not at the domes, not at the facades, just at the crosses. Forget for a moment everything you were told about the unity of the Orthodox tradition. Just look. The Ivan the Great bell tower rises into the sky with an elongated 8-pointed cross with a slanted crossbar. The same type crowns the Archangel and Assumption cathedrals. Strict geometry, a recognizable shape that everyone recognizes from childhood. And now turn your head to the left. The Annunciation Cathedral. Its crosses are completely different, equilateral with a crescent at the base. You will see the third type at the Upper Spassky Cathedral, where the shape of the cross differs from the first two. Three types in one square, in a small area of a few hundred meters. The cross is not architectural decor, it is a sign, a symbol that means something, points to something. Think of road signs. A person who does not drive a car cannot distinguish no stopping from no parking. For them, these are just red circles with lines. But a driver sees the difference instantly because they know the language. The same is true for crosses. For a modern person, these are just church crosses. But for those who lived 300 years ago, each shape, each detail carried a specific message. Three different crosses in one square mean three different messages. But to whom? Maybe this is a coincidence of one square. Let's expand the map. St. Basil's Cathedral on Red Square. Elongated 8-pointed crosses, like on the bell tower of Ivan the Great. We are heading to Alexandrovskaya Sloboda, the so-called residence of Ivan the Terrible. Here, three churches stand side by side. The Trinity Cathedral is topped with an 8-pointed cross with a crescent at the base. But the neighboring churches have completely different shapes. It cannot be just like that. This is marking, code, a system of distinctions. The Menshikov Tower on Chistya Prudy in Moscow reveals an even stranger picture. Currently, it features a traditional dome with a cross, unremarkable in itself. However, originally, when it was built at the request of Alexander Menshikov in the early 18th century, the tower was crowned with a 30-meter gilded spire topped by a figure of an angel holding a cross in its hands. Not a cross on the dome, but an angel with the spire. The height of the structure reached 81 meters. It was the tallest building in Moscow, surpassing even the Ivan the Great bell tower by 3 meters. A challenge? A statement? For the governor's family chapel, too ambitious, isn't it? It's as if Menshikov intentionally placed his symbol higher than that of the Tsar. The official version states, on June 14th, 1723, during the funeral of a priest, lightning struck the spire. A fire began. The flames destroyed the wooden structures, melted the bells, and the top collapsed. A few years later, it was replaced with a modest dome with a familiar Orthodox cross. A convenient legend. Lightning will excuse everything. Fire will justify everything. But the question remains, why was a spire with an angel placed at all, if this is an Orthodox church? Where does such symbolism come from in the heart of Orthodox Moscow? An angel with a cross in hand is a Western tradition, closer to Catholic or Masonic architecture. Such spires crown the cathedrals of Prague, Amsterdam, Hamburg. And this detail stood atop the tallest building in Moscow for several decades, towering over all the cathedrals of the capital, until a convenient fire occurred in the year when Menshikov happened to fall from grace. Sretensky Monastery. Here, the crosses look different. Instead of a diagonal beam, there are patterns that resemble lace made of metal. Unfathomable curls that do not fit into any known classification. At the Church of the Conception of St. Anna in Zaryadye, there is a cross with a crescent at the base, and at all four ends of this cross, small crosses are duplicated. A cross within a cross. What could this signify? What kind of hierarchy? What kind of system? As if the main cross generates four smaller ones, creating a tree-like structure of power or belonging. Ivanovsky Monastery, one of the oldest in Moscow. The towers are topped with crosses that at first glance seem almost Catholic. There is a slight tilt, but it is hardly noticeable. Two towers are a very characteristic detail for Catholic churches, like Cologne Cathedral. But this is Moscow, the Orthodox center. Why such crosses? Why does architecture more suitable for Western Europe stand in the heart of Russian Orthodoxy? Vladimir, the former capital of Rus. The golden gates with the gate church bear a cross of an unusual shape, as if the architects were competing in originality. The Dmitrievsky Cathedral, dated to the so-called pre-Mongol period, is adorned with a cross with numerous rays and branches. It resembles a star more than a traditional cross. The Assumption Cathedral in Smolensk, the church of Andrew the Bogolyubsky in Rostov the Great. Everywhere there is diversity. Moreover, in Rostov, the cross of the central dome differs from the crosses of the four side domes of the same church. On one building, different signs, as if each dome belonged to different owners or signified different functions. If the faith is one, why are the symbols different? Architects explain this by creative freedom, regional features, and the influence of different schools. But the cross is not a decorative element that can be changed at will. It is the main symbol of the religion. Imagine if Muslim mosques began to crown their domes with crescents of different shapes and sizes, with or without additional stars. This would raise questions, theological disputes, accusations of heresy. So why can Christian crosses be so different and no one asks questions? Why is this perceived as normal? The answer is simple. It was a language, a system of signs that was read by the initiated. Each form of the cross indicated affiliation to a certain tradition, order, territory, possibly even a dynasty. And this language existed before it was changed, before one type of cross was declared the only correct one, and the others began to be gradually replaced. Imagine a world where every city, every region had its own version of the cross. Not an error, not a deviation, but a conscious choice marking identity. When did this happen? In the 18th century, during the Romanovs. It was then that the mass unification of church symbolism began. The 8-pointed cross with a plaque, a slanting bar, and a base became regarded as the canonical Orthodox cross. All other forms began to be perceived as deviations, mistakes, or foreign influence. Under Catherine II, a large-scale program of repair and restoration of churches took place throughout the country. During this work, the crosses were changed. The old ones were removed, and new, correct ones were installed. The process went on systematically, methodically, without unnecessary noise. Examples of cross replacements are recorded in monastery inventories. Novodevichi Convent. The inventory of 1757 indicates the replacement of crosses on the Smolensk Cathedral. The old crosses are described as gilded copper with unusual finishes, while the new ones are described as wrought iron of a uniform pattern. Don Convent. During repairs in the 1760s, the crosses of the small cathedral were replaced with the phrase, "They came into disrepair." However, copper does not deteriorate in 100 years to the extent that a complete replacement is required. This was a planned unification under the guise of repairs. The old crosses were not discarded. They were melted down, erasing all traces. The Church of St. Nicholas in Kamovniki preserved a document on the transfer of an old cross weighing 8 poods for melting down for bell tower needs. 8 poods of copper is 130 kilograms. Why melt down such a value? Because the shape was incorrect. Why was such standardization necessary? If the old crosses were also orthodox, what is the point of changing them? The fact is that they were not just orthodox. They were symbols of different systems, different centers of power. Before the Romanovs, Rus was not religiously homogeneous in the way we understand it now. There were different traditions, different schools, different symbols, perhaps different branches of one faith, but with their own identity. The Romanovs unified all of this, subordinating it to a single standard. They erased the differences so that there would be no questions about who was in charge. One king, one church, one cross. The crosses on the domes are a visible part of the war, but the real battle was going on under our feet. Literally. Look down. Literally. The Church of the Conception of Saint Anne in Zariadye. Officially, it was rebuilt in stone in 1547, the very year when Ivan the Terrible was crowned. Allegedly, the wooden church burned down in a fire, and it was rebuilt anew. Approach the foundation. Look closely. The base of the church is made of white stone slabs with carved ornamentation. But this is not just stone. These are tombstones. The pattern on them is recognizable for those who studied ancient Russian symbolism, the so-called forked cross. Although it cannot be called a cross, it is a fork or trident, an ancient princely tamga, the family emblem of the Rurik dynasty, which existed long before the baptism of Rus. On the sides of the slab is the ornament of a wolf's tooth, a triangular geometric pattern that appears on ancient textiles, ceramics, and weapons. This pattern signified protection, the boundary between worlds, a talisman against evil. On the front side is a braid, a plait, symbolizing the continuity of the lineage, eternal movement, and solar symbols in the form of circles and rosettes, referring to the sun cult that existed in Rus alongside Christianity. No Christian crosses, only ancient signs that are hundreds, perhaps thousands, of years old. Signs that were passed from father to son, from prince to prince, from generation to generation. And these slabs, which once lay on the graves of princes and boyars, marking the resting places of people who ruled over cities and regions, are now walled into the foundation of the church. Just bricks in the wall. You can approach and touch them. Run your hand over the ancient stone. Feel the carving under your fingers. They are there, in the wall, half a meter off the ground, accessible, visible, but no one pays attention. Tourists photograph the temple. Parishioners rush to service. Children play nearby. And no one knows that they belong to someone's grave. Trinity Sergius Lavra. In front of the entrance to the temple lies a slab made of white stone. The same ornament, wolf's tooth, braid, forked pattern. Parishioners step on it as they enter the church. They wipe their feet. Thousands of people pass over this stone daily, unaware that beneath their feet is someone's gravestone. In the Rostov Kremlin, one of these slabs serves as a threshold for the bell tower. Literally a threshold that you step over to enter inside. On Spasano-Livkovsky Lane in Moscow, there is a fence. A whole fence, about 20 meters long, made of white stone gravestones with ancient patterns. If these were slabs with Christian crosses, it would cause a scandal. Reports on television, public outrage, accusations of blasphemy, intervention from the church. But these are slabs with forked patterns, with pagan, as they are called, symbols, and therefore silence. No one cares. Whose graves are these? Whom did they bury under these signs, which the Romanovs deemed unworthy even of preservation? The symbols on the slabs are the key. Ipatiev Monastery in Kostroma. There, under the white stone tombstones with forked patterns, lie the boyars Godunov, one of the most influential families of pre-Petrine Russia, which gave the country Tsar Boris, a family that almost founded a new dynasty, if it were not for the time of troubles and the arrival of the Romanovs. Trinity Sergius Lavra, the burial place of the Godunovs. Outside, on the wall, there hangs a plaque depicting tombstones with crosses. The official version, trimmed to standard. But enter from the other side, where they store household inventory and old items. There lie the real slabs in galvanized boxes, as if in coffins. They were hidden so that no one could see the front side. Because there are no crosses. There are forked patterns and Russian lettering, that do not fit into the official history. The Archangel Cathedral of the Moscow Kremlin, the burial place of great princes and tsars, Ivan the Terrible, Basil III, Dmitry Donskoy, all lie in white stone sarcophagi. And there are no Christian crosses on these sarcophagi. Only forked patterns, two-pronged figures, three-pronged tridents, geometric ornaments. This is the symbolism of the ruling elite before the Romanovs, the dynasties of the Rurikids, the Godunovs. Those who ruled Rus for hundreds of years did not use Christian crosses on their tombstones. They used family signs, tamgas, pagan symbols. The trident pattern is not a cross. It is a princely tamga, a sign of lineage. The two-prong and three-prong symbols were used on seals, coins, and banners. It was a system of identification, a coat of arms in the ancient understanding. Each branch of the dynasty had its own variant. Some had two prongs, some had three, some had additional elements. The State Historical Museum houses seals with such signs under inventory numbers. The seal of Sviatoslav Yaroslavich is a two-prong symbol with a cross between the prongs, number GIM 84532. The seal of Vsevolod Yaroslavich is a three-prong symbol, number GIM 84537. These signs coexisted with solar symbols, circles, swastikas, rosettes, images of the sun and moon. All of this is not Christian symbolism. This is pre-Christian, or more precisely, a parallel tradition to Christianity that existed in Rus for centuries. The princes were baptized, built churches, but left the signs of their ancestors on their graves. Look at the spinning wheel from the collection of the Alexandrovskaya Sloboda Museum, inventory number AS 1847. Dating, 1830, the village of Karabanovo in Vladimir province. It is covered in continuous carving. Two horses look at each other, between them the tree of life on the sides, syren birds with female faces at the bottom, a lion with its paw raised, a symbol of the strength of the lineage. Geometric patterns frame the entire composition. Diamonds, crosses in circles, wavy lines representing water. This is a gift-spinning wheel given by the groom to the bride. Each pattern had a meaning. It was a coded message. Two horses, the union of two clans. The tree of life, the continuation of the lineage. Children. Syren birds, happiness and prosperity. The lion, protection. And on this spinning wheel, created in a Christian country in the 19th century, there is not a single Christian cross. People still remembered the old language of symbols, still knew how to read the carving as a text, still conveyed through symbols what they did not say aloud. Before the Romanovs, symbols were a language. Forked patterns, special shapes of crosses, ornaments. All of this carried information about belonging to a clan, about status, about territory, about tradition. The Romanovs destroyed this language. They standardized the symbolism, declared one type of cross to be correct, and the others as deviations. And most importantly, they smashed the tombstones of their predecessors and incorporated them into the foundations of their churches. This is not saving stone. White limestone has always been abundant in Russia. This is a ritual of humiliation, a symbolic act that says, your dead are nothing. Your graves are building material. Your memory is a threshold that we step over. Where do these stone tombstones with princely symbols meet? Moscow, the Church of Anna in Zaryadye, Spasonalivkovsky Lane. Vladimir, the foundation of the Assumption Cathedral, the Northern Wall. Kostroma, Ipatiev Monastery, burials of the Godunovs. Yaroslavl, Spaso-Preobrazhensky Monastery, Western Fence. Rostov-Veliki, the Kremlin, the threshold of the bell tower, visible to every visitor. Trinity Sergius Lavra, several slabs at the entrance to the main cathedral. Nizhny Novgorod, traces of such tombstones are mentioned in the descriptions of the 19th century, but the slabs themselves have not survived or are hidden in storages. And where are they absent? St. Petersburg, not a single one. Smolensk, not a single one. Crimea, None. Krasnodar? None. Siberia? None. St. Petersburg, a new capital, built by the Romanovs from scratch on swamps in the early 18th century, literally in an empty place. There is its own symbolism. Everything started anew there, without regard to old traditions, without the traces of previous dynasties underfoot. Smolensk, a border zone where the influence of Catholic Poland was strong for centuries. There are different symbols, different architecture, a different history. Crimea, Krasnodar, Siberia, territories that became part of Russia later, or where there was no strong princely tradition of the Rurikids. The area of distribution of white stone tombstones with forked patterns is the territory of the core of Moscow Rus, the possessions of the Rurikids and Godunovs before the arrival of the Romanovs, the dynastic heart of the country, the place where Russian statehood was formed. And it was here, in these territories, that the Romanovs conducted a purge. They smashed tombstones, replaced crosses, erased the symbols of the old power. In the new territories, in St. Petersburg, in Siberia, there was no need to do this. There were no traces of predecessors. There, history could be written from a clean slate. If the gravestones are shattered, the crosses replaced, and the territory cleared, it means they have erased not just symbols, they have erased the very memory of power, of the dynasty that ruled for almost 750 years before the Romanovs. The time of troubles, from 1598 to 1613. 15 years of chaos that tore the country apart. The end of the Rurik dynasty after the mysterious death of Tsarevich Dmitry. Boris Godunov on the throne, the first Tsar not from the Ruriks. Then his sudden demise during a meal, poison or a blow, it is not exactly known. The appearance of false Dmitris, one after another, each declaring himself the miracle surviving Tsarevich. The Polish intervention under the pretext of supporting the legitimate heir. The famine of 1601 to 1603, when a third of the population perished from lack of food. Epidemics that decimated entire cities. A war in which the noble families slaughtered each other for the right to control the throne. And finally, the ascension of the Romanovs in 1613, a new dynasty that had not directly claimed the throne before suddenly comes to power. The official version, the People's Militia of Minin and Pozharsky, drove the Poles out of Moscow, freed the country from the invaders, and a new dynasty ascended the throne, chosen by the Zemsky Sobor as a compromise figure acceptable to all noble families. A beautiful story of liberation, a patriotic myth that is taught in schools. But what if it was not just an intervention? What if the time of troubles was a cleansing of the territory from supporters of the old dynasty, from bearers of old traditions, from those who remembered how things were before the Romanovs? The Poles and Lithuanians could have just been an instrument, mercenaries in a more complex game. They were hired, used, and then driven beyond Mozhaisk, as the legend goes, creating an image of heroic liberators. But the traces of that time, destroyed churches, destroyed archives, entire noble families that disappeared, speak of deeper and darker processes. After the year 1613, a large-scale reconstruction of churches begins throughout the country. Restoration, as it is officially called. Old churches are repaired, renovated, and put in order after the war. But the scale of work goes beyond mere repairs. In Moscow, Vladimir, Rostov, and Yaroslavl, construction work simultaneously begins. Thousands of craftsmen, caravans with materials, entire armies of masons. Funding comes from the treasury, despite the war-torn country. And in the process of this work, the crosses are changed. Old, incorrect ones are removed and stored somewhere in monastery cellars, or simply melted down. New, standardized ones are installed on all churches. 8-pointed, with a slanted crossbar, identical from Moscow to the outskirts. The process of unification is carried out systematically, methodically, under strict control. Tombstones with forked patterns are removed from cemeteries, initially quietly, then increasingly openly. They are used as building material, embedded in the foundations of new churches, laid in thresholds, used for fences and pavements, systematically, methodically, throughout the territory of Moscow Rus. There is not a single case of such a slab remaining at the burial site. All have been removed, all have been relocated, all have been turned into utilitarian elements of new constructions. The Romanovs did not continue the tradition of the Rurikids. They replaced it. Forked patterns are symbols of fallen dynasties, and these symbols needed to be not just removed. They had to be physically trampled, humiliated, turned into construction waste. Entering the Romanov church, a parishioner literally tramples the graves of those whom the Romanovs defeated. This is not a coincidence. This is not a saving of stone. This is symbolism. This is the magic of power that works through the humiliation of the memory of the defeated. If at the beginning of the 17th century the times of troubles erased old Russia, then in the mid-18th century the disaster erased Tartary. One scenario, different scales. The time of troubles is a local reboot, change of dynasty, erasure of symbols, physical humiliation of the memory of predecessors. The disaster of the 18th century is a global reboot, change of civilization, erasure of technologies, burial of cities under clay and soil, disappearance of the population. The parallels are precise, almost synchronous in methods. Forked patterns in Rus are banned by the 1630s. Solar symbols of Tartaria disappear by the 1750s. Gravestones in the foundations of churches appear after 1613. Statues with eroded faces around the world are dated to the period after the 1750s. Orthodox crosses of the Romanovs become the standard under Catherine II in the 1770s. New global cartography without Tartaria appears in the same 1770s. The same handwriting of cleansing, only on different scales, but with the same technology and synchronization in time. Maybe the Romanovs did not just seize the throne of Russia. Maybe they became agents of a global cleansing. The time of troubles is a training exercise, a small cleansing, a practice of memory-erasing technologies. And then these same technologies were applied on a planetary scale, to shatter the symbols of the old system, to replace the crosses with uniform ones, to embed the tombstones of predecessors in the foundations of new buildings, to rewrite history, beautifully packaging everything in legends about fires, lightning, and restorations. Locally, this works. Therefore, it will also work globally. Necrotics of foundations, the dead embedded in the space of the living. White stone tombstones in foundations, thresholds, enclosures. This is not the recycling of stone. This is the creation of an egregore, an energetic structure that operates on a subconscious level. In traditional cultures, desecration of a grave is considered the gravest curse, not just for the deceased, but for their entire lineage. To destroy a tombstone, to trample the burial site, means to sever the connection with ancestors, to consign the lineage to oblivion. The Romanovs did not just erase the memory of the Rurikids and the Godunovs, they cursed them on a symbolic level, entombing the remains beneath the feet of the parishioners. Every day, thousands of people enter churches, wiping their feet on the white stone slabs, not knowing that these are tombstones, not knowing that beneath them lies the grave of a prince who defended this city 300 years ago, not knowing whose names have been erased by time and deliberate oblivion from these stones, not understanding that they participate in a centuries-old ritual of humiliation of fallen dynasties, which continues by itself, automatically, without violence or coercion. It was enough to initiate the process, to embed these slabs into the architecture, and then it works on its own. The fence on Spasonalivkovsky Lane, if the slabs had Christian crosses, with images of angels or saints, it would provoke outrage even now, in the 21st century. The church would intervene, the public would rise, the media would make a fuss, and the slabs would be returned to their burial place. But no one recognizes the floral patterns. For the modern person, detached from historical memory, this is just old carving, decor, an element of folk art. Beautiful, but unclear and unimportant. Why use gravestones specifically? White stone was abundant in Russia. Limestone quarries near Moscow and Vladimir operated for centuries, providing quality material for construction. Stonecutter masters knew how to carve blocks of any size and shape, decorate them with carvings, and create complex architectural elements. It was possible to carve new slabs without patterns, without history, without foreign memory that might interfere with the new ideology. But the Romanovs chose gravestones, slabs taken from the graves of their predecessors. This was a conscious choice, a well-thought-out political decision, agreed upon at the highest level. The ritual of mystical humiliation of defeated dynasties, which was embedded in architecture for centuries, to turn the sacred into the profane. The grave of the prince who defended Russia from enemies, into a threshold that thousands step over every day. The memory of great rulers, into building material for fences that children climb on while playing. The symbols of the power of predecessors, into anonymous blocks of the foundation, hidden from view, but bearing the weight of new temples. What the Romanovs did to the Rurikoviches in Russia, they did the same on a global scale with Tartary. The local war of symbols became a rehearsal for a planetary cleansing. The time of troubles showed memory can be erased, a dynasty can be replaced, symbols can be substituted, and no one will rise up if this is done gradually, without sharp movements, nicely packaging it in legends about natural causes. Fire, lightning, restoration, modernization, convenient words that hide the systematic destruction of traces of the past. Violet patterns are the language of the defeated in Rus. Where are their brothers on the global map? Solar symbols, swastikas, rosettes, images of the sun. All of this was destroyed around the world in the 18th and 19th centuries. Old temples were rebuilt to new standards. Ancient inscriptions were removed from the walls. Statues lost their faces, turning into anonymous stone blanks. A unified style of cleansing, the same technology across the planet. And the Romanovs were part of this process. Not random rulers of one country, but an element of a global system engaged in rewriting the history of the planet. We have forgotten how to read symbols, lost the key to the language of our ancestors. The crosscodes were seen only by the initiated, those who received knowledge from teachers, who studied tradition for years. Road signs are seen only by drivers who have undergone training. To others, they are meaningless or only intuitively obvious. The patterns on spindles were read by our ancestors, even in the 19th century, just 200 years ago. Horses, lions, birds, solar signs. These were love letters, messages that conveyed feelings and wishes without a single word. Entire stories, encoded in carving, understandable to both sides. A man carved a spindle for months, putting meaning into every curl. Every detail spoke of his intentions, his feelings, the future he was ready to build. A woman, receiving such a gift, read it like a book, seeing promises and vows behind the patterns. Now we do not even understand this. We look at the old spindle in the museum behind the glass and see merely decor, folk art, beautiful but meaningless carving. The information has been erased, the code lost, memory broken. The Romanovs did not just change power, did not merely seize the throne and rewrite chronicles. They replaced the language, changed the very system of information transmission. They destroyed the symbolic system that connected people with the past, with their lineage, with tradition, with the land. The old signs, forked patterns, unusual shapes of crosses, solar symbols on gravestones, are messages from the world before the Romanovs. From a time when symbolism was multi-layered, when differences between signs had deep meaning, when each symbol carried precise information about belonging, status, and intentions. The new signs, standardized Orthodox crosses, identical from Moscow to Siberia, are the seal of the victors, the sign of new power, a marker that others now rule here. Uniformity instead of diversity. One correct symbol instead of a multitude of living traditions. Simplicity and clarity instead of complexity and depth. Controlled oblivion instead of uncontrolled memory. the whole country has become a palimpsest, an ancient manuscript where new text is carefully written over erased, but not completely destroyed, old text. In medieval monasteries, monks washed away ancient texts from parchments to reuse the expensive material for new writings. But chemical analysis and special lighting allow us today to read what was erased centuries ago. The old text emerges through the new if you know where to look and what light to shine on it. The same is true for our history and architecture. Stone tombstones in the foundations of churches scream a silent scream of stone about the fact that there was another history here, different rulers, another system of power and faith. Different crosses on the domes of churches, despite centuries of unification, still whisper that the standardization was not complete, that somewhere there remained pockets of resistance, places where old traditions lasted longer. Somewhere traces have remained, forgotten by restorers, or intentionally ignored by those who understood their significance. Somewhere symbols have survived, hidden in plain sight, disguised as harmless decor. As long as the tombstones lie in the foundations, sealed but not destroyed, as long as the crosses are distinguished on the domes of churches from city to city, the mystery is alive. The code is not completely erased. It is only necessary to want to read it, to learn to see what is hidden in plain sight, to distinguish layers from the original. Each stone in the foundation of the Romanesque church is not just building material. It is someone. A person with a name that was recorded in chronicles, with a lineage that can be traced back for centuries, with a history that was sung in epics. A prince who defended the city from nomads in the 12th century. A nobleman who financed the construction of the first stone churches. A warrior who fell in the Battle of Kulikovo or during the defense of Moscow from Toktamish. Someone who lived a full life, ruled justly or unjustly, loved, fought, built, left heirs. And this specific individual has been turned into anonymity, into a stone without a name, into a threshold that thousands of times a day are crossed by parishioners hurrying to morning service, into a fence that old women lean on, resting on their way to the market, into a step that children run up and down while playing hide and seek near the church. Have you seen such stone tombstones with forked patterns, with two prongs and tridents, with the ornament of wolf's tooth and braid in your city? Have you noticed strange stones in the foundations of old churches, on carved slabs in the walls, on ancient symbols that do not resemble Christian ones? Write in the comments where you encountered these signs, in which city, in which temple or monastery. Describe what you saw. Together, piece by piece, we will restore the map of that world that they tried to completely erase. The map of the domains of the Rurikids, the true borders of old pre-Peter Russia, the territory where symbols are still alive, embedded in foundations, trampled in thresholds, turned into fences and pavements, but not completely destroyed, not erased entirely. Because stone remembers longer than people, because stone carving survives dynasties, because symbols, once carved in granite, cannot be completely erased, they can only be hidden or forgotten. Subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to click on the bell so you don't miss new investigations. There are many more mysteries and discoveries ahead. We will continue to search for evidence, ask uncomfortable questions, and explore what official science ignores. Because the truth is always nearby. You just need to want to see it.